Hey, what's going on, guys? My name is Jacob Bennett with Bulldog Analytics, and today I want to discuss slicer-driven images or logos in your Power BI report. Now, what do I mean by this? Say you've got a slicer in your report and you want specific logos or images that you've brought into your report to return based on your slicer selection. Not only that, but maybe you also want to default to a specific image of your choosing based on if the all option is chosen for that slicer. A great example is working for a large company that acts as a parent company over multiple subsidiaries. And maybe you've got a slicer in place that allows you to select the specific company that you want your report to output. Now, it's really not difficult to associate an image with a company in this instance, or really whatever you might be reporting on. The difficult aspect that I've seen people just basically ignore is, what if you want to select all in that slicer and default to the parent company's logo? I've seen a lot of people skip this step and basically you select all and it just kind of returns this ugly conglomeration of like multiple logos, and it just doesn't create a good end user experience, especially if it's someone at like the corporate level in my example where they're trying to view the entire company. I've got a great solution for this for whatever image you want to default when selecting all in your slicer. For my example today, I'm going to be using the US state flags, where when selecting a specific state text in the slicer, it returns that state's flag. Now, if we select all, I'd like for it to default to the US flag. So that's going to be our example today. Let's go ahead and dive in. All right, guys, as you can see, I've got an example report on my screen here for sales order details. And what I'd like to do is, based on the state selection, I'd like to put the state logo here, or excuse me, the state flag. And if I default to all like this, it would show the American flag. Now, the most important part to make all this work is to actually have access to these images. So the way I'm going to go about this is by having an Excel document that contains all the information I need. So let's go ahead and click over to that. All right, so as you can see here, guys, I've got a state flag document. It's an Excel document containing the state abbreviation and name. And then actually in column C, I've got the flag image itself imported into the Excel document. Full disclosure, this is actually unusable from a Power BI standpoint, but I've got it here just to kind of display the functionality here. And then past that, I've got two usable formats from a Power BI perspective. First, I've got a web URL, so this actually points to a Wikipedia image. And then next to that, I've got a base 64 code. This is a code that I'll walk through how you can derive this here in just a second, but basically it displays as an image in your report. I'm not going to pretend like I know a whole lot more than that. I will say it requires this data type to start the code, and then I concatenate it with this piece of code that I'll show how I derive here in just a second, and it spits out the information that we need for Power BI reporting. Now, FYI, there is a character limit in Excel for how many characters you can have loaded into a single cell. So I'm using very compressed images to create this conversion to base 64 code and then be able to input it in the cell itself. If you're using large detailed images, it's likely not going to fit in the cell, and so you probably want to go the compressed route or just stick to a web URL. Now, if you don't want to have to lean on a web source and you want to import the data using base 64 code, it's important to first start out with an image. So here I've got a folder, and as you can see, I've got a copy of all the state flag images here available in this folder. Now, there's two ways I've used to get this base 64 code. The first one that I leaned on for a long time before discovering this second solution is actually a website, and it's called codebeautify.org. It has a PNG to base 64 converter. You can actually upload a PNG and it'll output a base 64 string that you can then copy into your document. More recently, I've actually learned how to leverage a software called Notepad++. As you can see here, it's a free source code editor and Notepad, and it's a very helpful tool to have on your computer. But basically, you just open that up, and you also open the folder where your images are located, and you're going to simply drag and drop the image into Notepad++, and it's going to create a code. You're going to select that code and come up to Plugins, go to MIME Tools, and select Base 64 Encode with Padding. From there, you're going to select all that. You're going to copy, go into your Excel document, and then you're going to paste that here in the base 64 code. Now, as you can see, I haven't done all 50. I didn't want to go one by one for all 50 states, so I have a couple examples here just so we can compare against the web URL option. But as you can see, I essentially have a concatenation occurring with the data type, a comma, and then the base 64 code that we just derived, and it outputs what we need to use in analysis. Now let's go ahead and save this and bring it into Power BI. All right, guys, as you can see, I've got my report open, so let's go ahead and bring in that state flag image document. I'm going to click Transform Data, which is the Power Query editor. I'm going to come up to New Source. Now, in this instance, I'm just going to select Excel Workbook because it's a document located on my desktop, but as I've emphasized in other videos, it's always the best practice to store things in a cloud location like OneDrive or SharePoint. I'm going to select my document and I'm going to click Open. I'm going to select my table and click OK. All right, as you can see, I've got the state abbreviation and name, which is coming through just as we saw it in the Excel document. As you can see, I've got the flag column with errors. I mentioned at the beginning that that would actually kick out errors, so that's to be expected. We can actually remove that. Next to that, we've got the web URL, which is coming from the Wikipedia image. And then we've got our data type, which is just redundant all the way down. We've got that base 64 code that I derived from the Notepad++ application. And then that concatenation column, which is what we're going to ultimately leverage in our reporting. Now, for the sake of reducing unneeded content, I'm going to go ahead and delete these columns. And we can go ahead and close and apply. All right, I'm going to go over to a blank page here. And I'm going to break out that new table I just built, the US states. And I'm going to go ahead and just bring in all elements of that table. All right, so as you can see, the base 64 code and the URL are not appearing as images. So there's actually one additional step we need to take before they appear correctly. So for the URL, I'm going to select that over here in the data pane. I'm going to come up to data category. I'm going to go ahead and drop that down and select image URL towards the bottom. All right, let's get rid of the on object editing here so that we can kind of see that last column. All right, that's kind of difficult to navigate just due to this base 64 code for slicers. So let's go ahead and update that as well by going to data category and selecting image URL. All right, now you can see that our flag images have loaded, which is pretty cool. Now again, the base 64 code, I only loaded in a handful of flags, so that's why you don't see all of them. But for the web URL, that actually works great. Now for your reports, either of these are great solutions. For today's example, I'm going to stick with the web URL I got from Wikipedia just because it's a little more comprehensive. But let's walk through how we would create these slicer-driven images and also designate a default when all is selected in the slicer. All right, as you can see, I've clicked back over to my report, and we definitely need to establish some sort of relationship between the states that are represented in this slicer and that new table that we just created. So if I search state up in the data tab, you can see that it exists in this sample custom dim table. And so I basically want to take the name from the US states and relate it over to that dim in the modeling. So I'm going to click into the modeling. As you can see, here's that sample custom dim. Let's go ahead and find my US states and drag it over by it. I'm going to take the name and I'm going to drag it on top of state. And that automatically creates the one-to-many relationship that I need. Let's go back into our report view. And now I can drag the URL field next to the state slicer. It's not like in the shape I have, so let's go ahead and delete that so I can work with this a little bit easier. All right, so as you can see, it's just kind of a list and it's pulled in as a data table, but we can kind of test this out. So if I were to come in here and select Alabama, I would expect for the flag to be limited to just Alabama. But as you can see, it still lists all the flags here over in my new image. So what's going on there? Well, the issue is that we're applying the filter here at this level in the dimension and expecting our new table for the URL field to be limited. Well, when we look in the modeling, and if I zoom in on what we've got going on here with our new relationship, I'm not sure why that's cut off, but that's a one-to-many. But the issue is that the filter only flows this direction from our new table to the sample customer dim. When we limit the state from the slicer, which is sourcing from the sample customer dim, we want that to then flow back to the US states table and limit the state flag that's being pulled in from the URL field. So what we need to do is select this relationship, come over here to the properties, and switch the cross filter direction from single to both, and click Apply Changes. Now when we click back to our report view, you'll see that it only limits it to the Alabama flag. So it's starting to work as expected. Now another change we could possibly make at this step is switching the visual type from table to an image specific visual type. If I open up my build pane, there is this simple image visual type which I can select. And I'll resize that and we'll leave it as this image type for now, but we'll actually see here in just a little bit that this type won't work, and I'll talk about that here shortly. All right, now that we've got this image in place, we're in pretty good shape. You know, if I switch it to different states, the flag pops up as expected, but the issue is when I remove the filter and select all, it just in this instance leaves it as the most recently selected flag, and that can be very misleading for the report. Now I'm going to walk you through the process that I currently use. You might have something more efficient in mind. If so, please communicate with me. I'd love to always apply optimization and efficiency to my reports, but at the end of the day, this is kind of my process now and it's been working for me just fine. I'm going to right click on my US states table and build a new measure in there. All right, so the idea is that this measure is actually going to be categorized as an image URL, and it's going to replace the current flag that's next to our state slicer. And we're going to use DAX to apply some logic to say, if a filter exists on states, then return the flag for the state that's being filtered. If no state's selected, then return the flag for when the value for name equals United States. I'm going to go ahead and write this, and then we can talk through it here in just a second. All right, guys, I think this looks pretty good. So again, to reemphasize what this is doing, we're using an if statement to say if the state field is filtered on, then we're going to select whichever URL is associated with the row that's selected. If the state name does not have a selection, meaning it's defaulted to all, then we're going to return the URL associated with the state name of United States, and we're going to use the lookup value, which is a DAX function similar to that of VLOOKUP. All right, before testing this out in our report, we also need to update the data category. As you can see up here at the top, it defaults to uncategorized. We need to drop that down again and come down to image URL. All right, so let's go ahead and close out of the DAX formula bar. Let's click on our flag over here. Over in our build pane, let's go ahead and drop the URL and let's drag in our flag measure. Now you'll see I test this a couple times and it's not working, and this is actually a limitation around the simple image visual not accepting a DAX formula. So, you know, I tested the card, it's kind of in the same boat. There's some third-party visuals I used to use, but it seems that they've actually been updated and they require a paid version now in order to leverage them. So I actually defaulted back to the native table visual. And, you know, at first this doesn't seem pretty. If I drag it in, it's got the column title because it's essentially treating this as a column, and there's just some like extra padding that's kind of built into the table visual that's hard to get rid of, but we can kind of manipulate this a little bit to look good. So let's go ahead and get rid of that column header, and unfortunately there's no way in the settings to do it, but if I double click on it here or the on object editing, I can just delete it out, just kind of put a space and click enter and it removes it. If I expand out the format pane, breakout size and style, if I come down to padding, you'll see it maintains some formatting I'd been testing earlier, but I basically removed all the padding to try to get the white space to reduce as much as possible around all edges. I removed all visual borders. If you come down to style and preset, I switched the style to none. I turned off all the grids. Well, it looks like I missed horizontal, so let's go ahead and turn that off. If you break out borders, I turned all these off as well. Let's go ahead and switch color to white just in case something sneaks through there. But overall, I think this starts to get us in a pretty good spot. So I'm actually going to expand out my table visual so that the scroll bar goes away. And I'm going to click on this and use the arrows on my keypad to move this all the way to the top. Now you'll see there's some white space even though I remove the padding, and if I try to close this, that scroll bar is built in there. Unfortunately, I think that's just a limitation with the table visual as it's not really built for images. But as long as this doesn't overlay another visual, I think we should be in good shape. And actually, if you go to View and we break out the selection pane, we can switch the order around to make sure that in this instance, my flag visual is not going to mess up one of my other charts or tables in my dashboard. All right, I'm going to go ahead and collapse some of these panes. Now, if I click out, I think that's actually looking pretty good. And if I go to my state slicer, let's drop it down, select Alabama. As you can see, it dynamically changes the flag to Alabama. Arizona, same thing. Arkansas, same thing. California, same thing. And if I deselect and it defaults to all, then it shows the American flag as I was hoping it would. So this is kind of the solution I've been working with. I hope that this is something that you can use in your reporting, and that's really all I've got for you today. All right, guys, that's all I've got for you today around this tip and trick using image-driven slicers and having a good default when you select all. I hope that you found this beneficial and that it can help elevate your reporting. If you like this kind of content, feel free to like and subscribe, follow along. We've got a lot more content in the works. I hope to see you in the next video. Bye.